Hi everyone, it's Vanessa Love. Thanks for checking out my channel and liking, subscribing, all of that great stuff. Alright, so today I wanted to talk about oppositional defiant disorder. There is a lot in the DSM-5 about this. I want to read the diagnosis. I also want to kind of explain some things about it because it can be very confusing and easy to misread. Alright, so let's see. So DSM-5, the big book of diagnoses. All right, so this is a pattern of angry and irritable mood, argumentative, defiant behavior, and vindictiveness that lasts at least 6 months. It has to have at least 4 of the 8 diagnostic criteria and interactions with at least one person that is not a sibling. Which I think is really interesting because some of this stuff, once you hear it, you'll be like, oh yeah, of course, siblings are kind of like that. All right, angry, irritable mood, often loses temper, is often touchy or easily annoyed, is often angry and resentful for 6 months, right? Argumentative defiant behavior, argues with authority figures, and for children and adolescents with adults. Often actively defies or refuses to comply with requests from authority figures or with rules, often deliberately annoys others, often blames others for his or her mistakes or misbehaviors. Vindictiveness, has been spiteful or vindictive at least twice within the last 6 months. They talk a lot about kind of how to look for it. They also talk about how this is causing distress and that it is not happening while someone is using substances, while they're having psychotic disorder, bipolar disorder, or depressive disorder. And they have a lot of different things here. So I was reading some of the things that happen. So this could lead, especially with kids, this could lead into conduct disorder and most often does, but not always. It also can be associated with ADHD, and that's kind of its own thing. They were also saying that because of the irritable and angry mood, that it could be a precursor for a depressive disorder later on. So it's kind of interesting that they kind of make those distinctions. And so they're saying that there's a lot of different risks and features of this. So for temperament, excuse me, let's see, problems with emotional regulation. So that's temperament. Environmental, harsh, inconsistent, or neglectful child rearing practices in the family. That can happen. And then genetic and physiological, which I thought was really interesting because it says that there's a number of neurobiological markers for this, like lower heart rate and skin conductance reactivity, reduced basal cortisol reactivity, which I think is kind of like your stress levels, abnormalities in prefrontal cortex and amygdala. So prefrontal cortex is where you predict what will happen next, and amygdala is where all of your emotions are until you're about 25, and then you start thinking with the prefrontal cortex. So if they're both affected, then I guess it might be related to it. Well, it is related to this, but I don't think that if you have both problems with those, that it's definite that you'll have this. So those are some really interesting things about that. It doesn't happen too often in adults. I've worked a lot with kids and teenagers who have had this. Now, let me explain though. I do want to make the distinction that this is not normal adolescent behavior. In the people who I have treated with this, they will say no to anyone. You can be like, hey, you walked past the desk and a paper fell. Could you pick that up? No. And they nope. There's nothing that you can do to them that will make them comply with that. Just nope. And then sometimes they get kind of mean about it too. It's kind of a marker of that. I've worked with traumatized teenagers, and I can tell you that you can make a request of them, and sometimes they'll like curse you out, but still do it. Like I was kind of practicing earlier, like, oh, could you grab that pen for me? And they'll be like, I can't believe you freaking asked me for things. Why can't you just get up and do this for yourself? This type of stuff. And like, they're nasty, but at least they do it. And definitely like in a group home setting, like they do. Oh my God, my hair. They do become a little bit like chiller. It's like, the therapist gets to work with them and like gets to really process some of the things, and they do that less. And also they follow direction, so that's it's still them following direction. It's just we wish they had a better attitude, but I think it's great anyway if they're able to do it. It's one of those things where I'm like, well, how long do you want this argument to last? Do you want to start fighting about attitude, or are you happy that they at least complied? Which is its own thing. I've had a couple of teenagers who have come to private practice for therapy, and who have, I believe, oppositional defiant disorder. And like the last couple have just been so resistant to treatment. I mean, for me, it's like, if they call me ugly, I'm not going to sit there and be like, you hurt my feelings. I'm like, okay, moving on. But I know like one of them had said that at the onset and said she didn't want to work with me. And like, that should have been the clue that this wasn't going to work out. Like, and I'm very used to the stalling tactics of kids with, we call it ODD, like with ODD. And so it was like, okay, if they have to be here at 2:00, they're going to like run out the time and be like, oh, we couldn't get there until 2:45 because I was having a meltdown, deliberately, that type of stuff. So, I think one of them, the majority of the time was like spent trying to just like get them to comply with anything, like talking or not arguing about rules for the office. Yeah. So, as I said, it's very different because like I have other clients who are teenagers who are depressed or anxious or, all these other things, academic problems, that type of stuff, sometimes behavioral problems, but like, some kids are rebellious, that type of stuff. Like, this is not that. Because some kids are rebellious, but they're very, very kind and they're very, very nice. Like when you talk with them, and if you like explain something rationally, they'll be like, okay, I don't entirely agree with that, but I understand where you're coming from. Like, like they'll still do it. But like ODD kids, that like it's a whole other thing. And I've worked with them for a long time. For me, they're one of the most, they're the ones that I struggle with the most, but like, well, I mean, one of the diagnoses I struggle with the most, but like, when you first start out in the field, you have to do a lot of things and you have to work with a lot of different populations. And I ended up just not working with a lot of populations that I work well with. So, that's unfortunate. And I'm glad that I have a private practice where, if there is a child who I'm like, listen, I'm trying to work with you, man. Like I'm doing all the things that, rapport building, which is very usual for kids, and teenagers as well. The rapport building, like just being reasonable, talking to them like an adult, like that type of stuff. Like, for these kids, it's not. They, one of the markers about this is the harsh, critical, neglectful parents. And so like, even though I don't always like that psychology does blame parents for some of the issues that like kids face, that kids get diagnosed with, especially like in the past when they've said that like with schizophrenia, it's, with the mom and stuff like that, which is no. It's that like I can understand why someone who has had like an inconsistent parent as a child wouldn't want to trust an authority figure and just kind of like, basically flip the bird to them and just be like, I don't want to do this. Like, you are nothing because like, you said that you had authority or something. That type of stuff. There are people who work really well with them. I think that, just where I think that the most change can happen is a more controlled environment. So definitely not private practice. I don't even know if like an after school program sometimes works if there's a lot of structure to it, but you have to know that they're going like the next day, not even the next day, but like the next hour, they can be right back at home with this neglectful or harsh or critical parent, so like we can do so much to like be like, hey, 2 hours a week, you're with us, 2 hours a day, you're with us. But like, they go right back into that environment. My recommendation is hospitalization or long-term programs, maybe a residential for some of the kids who are experiencing this, just because like the consequences that they get actually matter to them. So, when you have an inconsistent parent and they're not going to follow through with like taking something away because the child isn't going to respond to that, or they're just going to take it anyway because you're not going to be home or something, like that doesn't work, and also not having like teachers on board sometimes, or like the teachers are on board, but the parent can't like follow through, that type of stuff. Like, I think it's better to do residential programs for kids with this, but I do know that there are private practice therapists who work really well with ODD kids. And I'm like, that could be something. It's one of those things because it also has to involve the parents that I'm like, well, it's just really not my strength. But I am so glad for the people who do make it their strength. And who do want to like really like have that consistency, and I think parents sometimes go through their own, they clearly go through their own stuff. So like, it's not always like the parent themselves, it might be the situation, which is unfortunate. But yeah, that's, there are people who do that. If like you are worried that you might have this, if you are worried that your kid might have this and is called kind of a spirited kid, maybe seeking treatment in whichever ways you feel comfortable. Because I know that, just because I recommend something doesn't mean it is the recommendation. But yeah, like just research more into it for treatments and stuff like that if it's something that you feel like, oh, this might be an issue. Anyway, I hope that was helpful for you. It seems kind of like sometimes the diagnosis and like just kind of the overall like opinion of like me as a psychologist, but also like, or counselor, and like, me knowing like kind of how other counselors talk to each other about these type of things has been helpful for you guys. So that's why I did want to do something like this, and kind of raise your awareness about some of the things that other people go through. All right. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk with you guys soon.